Hello and welcome to Rights and Recourse, a program that tackles legal issues, bring you information and analysis. My name is Dumile Montez. Remember, you can also be part of our discussion by tweeting us at Rights Recourse or calling our studio line on 011 714 5497 or 5498. Alternatively, you can email your thoughts about this program and many others you'd want us to cover to Rights and Recourse at sabc.co.za. No political democracy can survive and flourish if the mass of our people remain in grinding poverty, without land, without tangible prospects for a better life for all. Attacking poverty and deprivation must therefore be first priorities of a democratic government. This extract from the first socio-economic document drawn up by the ruling party in 1994, the Reconstruction and Development Program, or simply the RDP, is still relevant today. Today, 22 years into our democracy, this statement is relevant. Today, on Rights and Recourse, we examine the impact of the 2016 national budget delivered by Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan this week on the lives of many South Africans who find themselves marking time on one spot. But first, let us have a look at this insert.
We have to recognize that existing social security arrangements are fragmented, which raises costs and leaves several social needs unaddressed. Minister Dlamini and I have been given the responsibility by the President for the Social Security Reform Program, which has to draw on both international good practice and interdepartmental work of recent years. Tighter regulation of the retirement fund industry is part of this reform effort. The intention is to protect members' interests and ensure that funds are not dissipated by unnecessary administration and financial costs, and that an income in retirement is assured. Our engagements with stakeholders will continue this year in the NEDLAC framework and elsewhere. To support a greater national savings effort, we introduced a tax-free savings account last year. The response has been most gratifying. About 150,000 accounts have been opened, equaling a savings of 1 billion rands at this stage. For those who have not yet taken this opportunity, you have until the end of the month to take advantage of this year's 30,000 rand limit for special tax treatment in these accounts. Let's increase those numbers. Let me assure public servants again that reform of the retirement system will not affect their accrued pension rights. To
take part in the discussion are Dick Forslund from the Alternative Information and Development Center will be talking to us from our studios in Durban. And from Cape Town, we are joined by Mr. Elroy Paulus, media spokesperson at Black Sash. And with me in the studio is Mr. Sisan Chona, President of the Enterprise Development Council of South Africa. Gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse. We did invite, I'd like to just say, we did invite Treasury, but they somewhat did not see their way through in taking part in this panel discussion. Gentlemen, if all of you can hear me, I want to put this question to all of you. The minister had to balance what many thought would be harsh austerity measures with the social security issues mandated by the Constitution in Section 27 of the Constitution, mainly that every citizen had a right to health, care, food and water. Am I right or am I blowing my own horn? Who wants to go first? Dick?
Well, he made a balance, but perhaps it was rather a balance between the demands from the Credit Ratings Institute and the upcoming local government elections. When it comes to the balance of the whole social grants issue, it has been pointed out by many that the budget didn't increase the childcare grant and other social grants at the rate of the inflation, even of the official rate of inflation that will come, but especially not the rate of inflation that will hit the poor, those who receive these grants. So food inflation, for example, is expected by many to rise over 10% this year. So I think for the poor, for the working class and the poor, austerity, so-called austerity, is already here. And I think that was really bad because there was a political space before this budget to increase the tax rates on the high-income earners, but this political space was not used.
Elroy, for you, your organization Black Sash has for many years been fighting at this area, at the downtrodden in South Africa for many years. Do you see it the same way as Dick says?
I would agree largely with what Dick has said. I think the minister had to do a balancing act within a very difficult context. When he was the Minister of Finance, I think in 2014, before he went to COGTA, I think if government seriously listened to his proposals and some of those issues were taken through and taken to heart, especially by ministers, perhaps the fiscal space to do more with the current budget would have been more progressive under very difficult circumstances and difficult context. So yes, I would agree with Dr. Forslund's perspective. When the consumer price index is developed, it's a number that is reached after looking at a few factors, and amongst these are food, transport, clothing, and many other things. And as I've said before, the impact of these weightings in the calculation of the CPI index for this financial year again disproportionately impacts on the poor. So I think more austere times are to come, disproportionately again against the poor, and I think that we are facing tough times ahead. I do think, however, that the context could have been far more difficult. If some leaders had their way, then we may have had a worse scenario. I think Minister Pravin Gordhan, in his speech, alludes to the fact that we have to be resilient, that we are committed. He asks what the role of the state should be. In the realization of Section 27 rights, as you say, Dumile, the National Development Plan speaks very clearly about the role of citizens to be active citizens. So I hope that as the medium-term expenditure framework rolls out, government is sensitive to what people are experiencing on the ground, and that evidence-led feedback could help even sharpen the distribution of resources in this very difficult time, which we think is the role of the state.
Thank you, Elroy. We'll come back to you on that. And I want to ask you the most difficult question, Mr. Njona, probably because I think they have exhausted the question I asked, but I want to ask you another question. Minister Pravin Gordhan on Wednesday this week tabled a staggering 1.5 trillion rand budget. If you are given the task of prioritizing, especially taking into account the quote from the RDP above that we made, how would you slice this cake?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big conundrum, the big question basically is there's an unlimited number of wants basically, but what is actually needed and how do you prioritize what? And also take into account the structure of this country that we have a vast majority of the people still living in poverty, still relying on the state grants and system and the social welfare of that. The issue that I kind of have is that when you've got roughly 14 million people on the state welfare and you only have about 6-7 million taxpayers, the question around sustainability starts to kick in. At what point can you keep on fueling this without exhausting basically the underlying economics around it? And we have to start shifting this economy around and rather reduce that 40 million over time as opposed to increase. Sometimes I wonder, when in government they announce that we actually more people on the state welfare and they clap hands. It should actually be the other way around.
It should be the other way around.
Do you get what I'm saying in terms of, well, we've got this, and it's a very important feature, by the way, but we should be reducing it over time. Where now the people coming through the system, coming through our education environment, should not end up in the state welfare, but rather be productive people within the economy. And I think that's the tight space that we're in as well. So I think my previous colleagues have kind of talked about the really tight space that the minister had to walk through, the finance minister. And the issue becomes around, you've got a limited budget, which is the revenue side of it, and unlimited basically needs there. And how do you start to shift things around? They had to sort out the desires of many stakeholders, including credit agencies, including also as well the political will of trying to get things done. And it is extremely tight. And I personally expected either VAT or income taxes to increase more substantially, but I suppose it's managed to hold it in place. The key thing, however, which is going to be very different now from previous budgets, people are going to be watching the implementation of it. 6 months later, we're going to be held accountable. I think the next review is around October, November. We'll look back and say, well, what has happened? And we will be put to task if we don't achieve those things that we said we're going to achieve.
Coming back to you, Dr. Forslund, as Minister of Cooperative Government and Traditional Affairs, Minister Gordhan would have come face to face with grinding poverty in the towns and villages he might have visited when he was minister in that department. Did that come through in this budget?
No, I don't think the Treasury is aware of how explosive the situation is in the country and how explosive it really can be. If you look at page 30 in the budget review, if you want to waste your youth by reading all this document, but you can have a look at page 30 and you will see that the Treasury speaks about that if there would be a downgrading of the credit ratings from the Credit Ratings Institute, they would go to aggressive austerity measures. And I mean, I think that this is politically and socially impossible unless you are heading for more and more repression and more policing of the working class and the poor communities. I think it's politically impossible. It's very dangerous. So the power of the Credit Ratings Institute, this must be diffused. And from AIDC, we have suggested for a long time now that the Treasury has to turn away from borrowing all its money from the so-called free financial markets and turn to the funds which are under the control of the government. And I'm thinking about the pension, the Public Investment Corporation, where all the state pensioners have their pension savings. I think that in this situation, I think that the government should start to borrow more and more from the PIC, which has 1.8 trillion in its fund at a regulated interest rate. Every half percentage point that the government can bring down the interest rate on the government debt, it will gain 11 to 13 billion rands. So I think that is a way to go. But of course, that would also be regarded as a so-called left move by the Credit Ratings Institute, and the business press would not be happy. So also,
thank you, Dr. Forslund. We've got to go to a break, unfortunately. Dr. Forslund will come back to, we'll continue. And it's a take we are going to explore in this discussion, that government, instead of borrowing money from institutions overseas like the IMF and the World Bank, should rather borrow money from the PIC. That's an interesting take. If you'd like to join us in this discussion, you can call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rise Recourse. Stay with us.
Whether you're an investment banker, an inspiring photographer, a loving parent, a taxi driver delivering precious cargo, a teacher, or an architect, we all need to plan for our future with safe, secure investments that bring financial freedom and peace of mind. Visit rsaretailbonds.gov.za. No fees and no commissions. RSA Retail Savings Bonds, the smart way to save.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse as we discuss the impact of the national budget on you, the man in the street. And Cesar, you wanted to come in there to the suggestion that came from Dirk Forslund.
Sure. I just want to put into context that a credit downgrade affects not just government, but the entire economy of this country. And I think this is what we saw around the backlash around December. when the country goes into junk status, as an example, right, it means that our banks can no longer borrow money from international world. It means that our corporates can actually not borrow money from the international world as well. And essentially, a lot of the world's pension funds have actually certain mandates whereby they can only invest in companies with a certain status and upwards. Anything that's junk, no one touches anymore, basically. Look at what's happening in Brazil at the moment, right? There's a lot of disinvestment over there, irrespective of whether you think that the economy is going to turn around or not. It's about the sovereignty of that economy itself. Once it goes the wrong way, people pull out. And because of the mandates that's behind it. So, and the impacts is just much wider than just government borrowing themselves. I think if it just isolated government alone, there would not have been a big backlash as we saw in December. Suddenly now corporate South Africa jumped in and said, "Oh, we're going to be impacted basically by this."
Let us once again go back to the minister and take an excerpt from what the minister said in Parliament during his budget speech. The Minister of Finance, Minister Gordon.
In respect of higher education, an additional 16.3 billion rands has been allocated for higher education over the next 3 years. 5.7 billion rands of this addresses the shortfall caused by keeping fees for 2016 academic year at 2015 levels, zero increase, and the carry-through cost of over the MTF period. 2.5 billion rands goes to the NSFAS scheme to clear outstanding student debt, along with a further 8 billion rands over the medium term to enable current students to complete their studies. In respect of basic education, early childhood education, our expenditure on basic education will increase from 204 billion rands this year to 254 billion rands in 2018-19.
Well, that's the Minister of Finance, Minister Pravin Gordhan. I'm actually surprised, gentlemen. We seem to be throwing money at a problem that needs to be solved without throwing money at it.
Yeah. More and more, the issue is going to be what happens with those budgets as opposed to the announcements. So this is the first step. We're literally drawing the lines that X amount of money will be allocated to Department X. Now, I think the turning point that we're at, we're going to start looking, have we spent that money wisely? Is the value for money in how we spent it? And there's going to be, in my view, some consequence management starting to come through the system. We saw with the Gauteng Premier, essentially firing the whole board of G Fleet. Right, not the board, the actual operational executives, saying that for a third year in a row, we actually have an audit query, basically. Consequence management. When people start to see that when you don't do what you're supposed to do, that there's consequence behind it, we'll start to see, hopefully, some of that coming through.
Let me go to Cape Town, to Elroy. Elroy, we seem to be throwing money at all the problems we have.
Well, I wouldn't use the terminology that you're using, Dumile. First of all, a couple of things. I think that Mr. Nshona's perspective, I would agree with elements of it, but there are more SASSA beneficiaries, social grant beneficiaries, than what he quoted. He quoted 14 million, is actually 16.8. And where I strongly disagree with him is that he quoted a number of taxpayers that's much lower than what we have on record. It's about 13 million. And when we talk about taxpayers, we include people who pay VAT. So all of us, unless we're a baby or deceased, pay VAT. I think that's the first thing that we need to say. The second thing that we need to say is, from the Black Sash's perspective, many people have considered some of our statements, or have a perception for whatever reason, that we are welfareist. We're not. We are developmental. I would challenge anybody to cut social grants even further and see what problems arise at a social level. Dr. Forsland's perspective refers to a cost recovery model that is really, really problematic, particularly for poorer municipalities. Some municipalities depend in a larger degree on the intergovernmental transfers from national government to local municipalities in the form of conditional grants and equitable shares. And if you touch that, you will again relegate the people that voted in our democracy to drawers of water and hewers of wood. That is the degree of abject poverty and inequality that you will promote. So I don't think that the allocation for education and Section 27 rights is throwing money at a problem. First of all, it's a mandate of government. And secondly, we should not be kept completely at the mercy of the vagaries of the market. There has been countries that have done far more radical things in order to demonstrate solidarity with their electorate and citizens,
I just want to bring
cuts in their salaries.
Elroy, I just want to bring Dr. Forslund in here. For Dr. Forslund, you've been challenged by Elroy.
Yeah, I didn't really understand the challenge, but he can explain furthermore later perhaps. I mean, as for the local government and in the upcoming local elections, I think that one thing that should be considered, I haven't seen any political party proposing this, but that is the issue of the property rates. There you have a welfare, sort of a wealth tax which you could use, and which I believe is underused in the big cities. So that is another issue. You could even construct it so that it hits those with the...
Dr. Forslund, I think the minister made reference to capital gains tax that is going up, didn't he?
Yeah, it's going up, but I mean, given the level of tax dodging among the rich and among the corporates, it would give many more billions to really disclose all the financial statements also of the local subsidiaries of multinational companies and clamp down on illicit financial flows. In 2012, you had over 300 billion rand, which illegally sort of was taken out from the country. And the practice of transfer pricing, I mean, at AIDC we have had the privilege of being able to look at mining companies' subsidiaries, and all of the mining companies are using sort of sales commissions and management fees in order to transfer money from one part of their organization to another part of the organization. And that is where I think there should be a VAT, a 14% tax on these practices. I would like, when it comes to the 16.3 billion, I would in fact like to challenge this number, because I know it was a spin before the budget speech. Higher Education Minister Blades Demand, he spoke about the 17 billion additional that has been put in higher education, or post-school education and training, as the line item reads. But when you look into it, then you will see that the additional amount of real money compared to the former Minister Nene's midterm budget in October last year is 3.5 billion. So there's no, in my view, look at the numbers, there's no 16.3 billion rand in addition to education, and that will have consequences. There's a quite big substantial increase of the National Student Fund, but the issue, Pravin Gordhan spoke in his speech about cancelling the debt for students. I know for a fact, I've seen the SMS sent out to students at Nelson Mandela University in Port Elizabeth. The Wild Chancellor there promised at a mass meeting that all debt should be cancelled. Then the students get the SMS message that it's only been postponed and that they can borrow new money in order to pay back the old debt, so to speak. So it's a lot of spin going around also. And the only substantial thing that has happened is that the outsourcing has been stopped at WITS and UKZN. I think that is a major victory when it comes to defending the economy of the working class and the poor.
Well, thank you. We'll come back. We'll stay with the education issue when we come back. When we come back, we will stay with the education issue. If you want to join us, you can call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Recourse. Stay with us.
SABC News, we report, contextualize and present news and current affairs honestly, fairly and fully. We consider it a duty to provide consistent, relevant, useful and top quality information and analysis. Our mission is to provide credible, accurate and interesting news programming, bringing news into everyone's homes in everyone's languages. Thank you, South Africa, for relying on SABC News for quality news output and for making us your #1 source of information. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
Welcome back. You're still watching Rights and Recourse here on SABC Channel 404. I want to continue with this vein on education. Yes, Elroy raised the issue of Section 27 of the Constitution. We all agree. But surely there needs to be efficiency. It seems to me there is no efficiency in the system.
So our obsession really lies around, are we getting value for money? Because putting more and more money in a bucket that's leaking is not solving the problem. Let's fix those holes first before we start putting money in. And I fully agree that you can't cut certain mandated, basically, issues around the budget side. We almost need to, it's a difficult space. You're actually trying to change the wheel, a tire of a car whilst the car is moving in itself. So you can't stop the vehicle. So it's about making sure that we do plug those holes. More and more every year. Look at the Auditor General's report. You see billions are just being fruitless and wasteful expenditure. When you're going to hear R1 billion has just been allocated, not sure where it is, we should start holding people accountable to that. Are we getting our money's worth, basically, with the places that we're investing it in?
Elroy, I want to go back to this issue of basic education that the minister made reference to. When I was at school, probably about a good 30 years ago, I was told that your final 2 years at high school should be giving you a look into your first modules at university. It's not happening these days.
I'm no expert in basic education. Our work focuses on Section 27 rights, and education is not a Section 27 right. In fact, it's even a stronger right in the Constitution. So there are far more qualified people to speak about this. But the best I can do, Dumile, is to think of the story and the real lived experience of my son, who is at Cape University of Technology. He's a third-year IT student. And when we applied for bursaries, we knew that we wouldn't get the NSFAS funding because of our income category. I asked him in his first year how many kids there were, and he said about 250. And in the second year, he said 125. And in the third year, there was much less, less than 30 kids. The reality is, what happens to the funding of NSFAS of the kids who didn't make it? What support do they need? What is it that we need to do in basic education in order to make sure that our young people are confident and capable of engaging at a tertiary level? So you're right when you say, and I would agree with Cesar, that we need to be more efficient in the use of government money. That doesn't detract from the fact that many of the initiatives undertaken by government is almost unthinkingly implemented as if we are a contract state. That if this is a mandate of government at time X plus a few months later, once tenders have been given, it's completely outsourced to the private sector, who doesn't comply with the basic requirements of rendering a state function. And it will be remiss of me and us, I think, to blame government entirely for the situation we find ourselves in. In the social assistance arena, the program called Rights and Recourse must focus on this issue of outsourcing, as mentioned by Dr. Forslund earlier on, where private companies get away with incredible things. In the Cash Paymaster Services SASSA bank account, we are dealing with social grant beneficiaries who are crying about the fact that there are unlawful, immoral, sometimes fraudulent deductions from their bank cards. So we are asking the private sector also to lead by example, to engage with our citizens, to honor the Constitution and not put profit before its people. In terms of intergovernmental relations,
let's go back to Dr. Forslund once you finish your point.
So in terms of efficiency, we throw more money per capita on health with worse development outcomes than countries poorer than us then put in less money. It is imperative for the Department of Social Development to share metadata with the Department of Health and vice versa. We need to ask the Department of Home Affairs, are they perhaps duplicating the initiative to experiment with banking? Where did they get the information from? Is the information that is acquired shared confidentially? Is information that is held by the state treated with the necessary protection and confidentiality that it deserves? There are many, many questions about efficiency, and we don't have the time to address all of it.
Dr. Forslund?
Yeah, the issue of corruption is very important, and I think one root problem is the procurement and the outsourcing policy, and I think that is what to have to be reversed. I hope that the victory is now at WITS University, where the salaries or the wages of workers will increase from 2.5 to 5,000 rand per month, 1st of July. As promised, and the victory at UKZN. I hope it's the start of the insourcing movement in the municipalities and local government, because almost by definition, corruption, it occurs where the private meets the public, and a lot of the services which is now sort of outsourced to private interest, it should be a responsibility of the local government. It comes to housing, water supply, fixing water installation, sanitation, roads, clinics, etc. It should be politically responsible officials who can be challenged also in elections, and it should be a part of local governmental companies, so to speak, and that would take care of a lot of the corruption, I believe. I think on a whole, when you face a global capitalist crisis, as South Africa is facing now, you have to consider to expand the non-capitalist part of the economy, so to speak. Otherwise, you will have further increasing mass unemployment, which is now announced in the mining sector. So you have to make a turn to the left. Otherwise, you will end up in even harsher measures in the next budget. In fact, given the argument now between one of the bosses of the South African Revenue Service, Patrick Gordon, and if it escalates this argument, you could even have a downgrading to junk status before the next budget. And then I think it's politically impossible to have this harsh austerity. You have to turn to government to intervene in the economy. You have to insource what is now been outsourced.
Cesar, you can talk without me having to talk.
So there's a bit of a tension building up here, because underlying theme coming from the budget speech is about more collaboration between public sector and private sector, right? Government wants to leverage its budget together with private sector to do more efficiently, more quicker, and seeing that investment coming through. Here's my view on some of the issues around outsourcing, and just the example around the SASSA bank accounts, an example. Government has a lot of power. Just because they choose to allocate the funds distribution to SASSA, I'm not sure, cash payment is an example, they still can control and manage what is basically happening over there. So my view, just because you outsource something, you don't outsource the responsibility and the accountability. Government is still accountable. If the private sector does not execute within the spirit of what is intended, they can still do something around it. They are the client. They can call back. They can bring back whatever it is.
In other words, what you're saying is, if we outsource something to be done by somebody else, somebody who's a project manager from the department who goes there every day to go and check this and this is done before it is too late.
There is oversight. You continuously have that all the time. what tends to happen, as soon as something is awarded, people look the other way and walk away from it. And that's when things start to creep in. You've got to have, in whatever form, either bi-monthly, every 6 months, whatever it is, reviews. Are you still implementing in the way that was intended to be implemented? And if not, what are the consequences of not doing that? That's, to me, you need to be alive around these things.
Well, if you'd like to join us in today's discussion, you can call us on 714-5497 or 5498. The issue Cesar was talking about, I remember I've been told that it took 20 years to build a police station in Diepsloot. Stay with us.
As stories are broken around the world, SABC makes sure you do not miss out. As the stories unfold throughout the day, News at 8 updates all newsworthy stories worldwide. Globally, we are there. Locally, we leave no story untold. Make a date with News at 8 every Saturday and Sunday on SABC News, Africa's news leader.
Now, for the older people that are listening to us carefully and others that depend on social grants. Our overall expenditure on social assistance will increase from 129 billion rands this year to 165 billion rands in 2018-19. The old age, disability and care dependency grants will rise by 80 rands to 1,500 rands in April. And by a further 10 rands to 1,510 rands in October. The child support grant will rise by 20 rands to 350 rands in April. And the foster care grant by 30 rands to 890 rands. In respect of defense, public order and safety, spending will rise from 172 billion rands this year to 204 billion rands in 2018-19. Taking into account the recommendations of the Farnham Commission of Inquiry, an amount of 598 million rands is allocated to enhancing capacity of public order policing units over the MTF period ahead. Allocations are also made to strengthen institutions supporting constitutional democracy and to combat corruption and to enhance the independence of the judiciary. Funds are allocated for the information regulator established in terms of the Protection of Personal Information Act of 2013.
While Minister Pravin Gordhan, we will go back to all of those things that the Minister has raised, but I want to start with social grants. Elroy, down in Cape Town. One of the biggest challenges for the Minister was the social grants issues. Many pensioners believe they cannot live with less than 2,000 Rand as the case is now. I think Dr. Fortune made a reference to that.
That's true. I think the commitment of our government since 1996, through, for example, the extension of the child support grant until the age of 18, the continued rollout of social assistance to the value of billions, on which 1 in 3 people in our country is dependent, is a commitment that needs to be commended by government. The issue is that for this financial year, the consumer price index, the average one, is disproportionately and harshly affecting the ability for people to buy the most basic of goods. In that space, Dumele, since the Cash Paymaster Services SASSA contract, we have heard reports of hugely accelerated deductions from these grants. And it's the point that Dr. Forslund has raised, that when public meets private, corruption creeps in. And I would agree with CISA that it is the role of the state or the public entity using public funds to hold the service provider accountable. The reality on the ground is that Net1 and CPS has basically treated the request, the demand by the state to stop these deductions with contempt. They basically said, go jump in the lake. Go ask anybody at any SASSA pay point about deductions that are coming off their account, which is patently unfair and sometimes fraudulent. I think those companies linked to the Net1 family, Moneyline, Cash Pay Master Services, Easy Pay, and many others, Moyo Manji, all in the same structure, needs to account for how it enabled themselves or third parties to effect deductions and reverse many of the gains made by the state for the poorest of the poor in our country. It is absolutely important for the private sector to be held accountable now. And it's not only happening in the social assistance area. Remember, pick it up. Remember the violations that they have, not incinerating body parts from operations and burying it. Remember many companies that have provided poor services, substandard, on RDP houses.
You sound more like somebody, Elroy, you sound more like somebody who's on a campaign trail. Let me come to Dr. Forslund. Dr. Forslund, there's a big question there. Yeah, are we not becoming... No, the question, I want to add something else. I know you wanted to comment to what Elroy was saying. I want to add something else. Are we becoming a nanny state?
I mean, that is... No. I mean, if you... Okay, let us take the basic here. If you have a government sector which is a part of the economy as it was under apartheid before 1994, the government sector was about 24, 25, 23%, 26% of the economy, of the so-called gross domestic product. Then apartheid falls, and you are obliged to expand all these rights and the public services to all citizens, not only to the whites. The idea that you can let the public sector remain the same size of economy as when you are only servicing a privileged minority, that idea is completely false. And that is why the government or the ruling party had to abandon the promise of free education, which ANC put forward in the 1990s. There is no free education now. The public sector is too small. If you extend the rights from a minority to all citizens, you have to have a larger public sector. Of course, it's true in a very unequal society like South Africa, where 10%, 15% of those who have a job, they earn over half of all the salaries. Of course, in a progressive tax system, they will also pay most of the taxes, but they do so because they live on a completely different level than the vast majority of the population. They still have a lot of money to pay in taxes, and some of them are also dodging taxes a lot and living like tourists in their own country when you come to the super rich. You can tax them more. Before this budget there was a space to tax more. I even see now Andile Kumalo, who is a boss of investment company and also run a show in Power FM. He speaks about being surprised that the personal income tax, the highest tax bracket, was not increased in this budget speech. I don't know. I think it was a concession to the Credit Ratings Institute, where you have the most conservative and bigot people sitting and judge the South African economy. We have to break loose from their judgment.
It could also be strategic as well, whereby the finance minister is leaving themselves some headroom should something else need to be done within October, basically the midterm budget. The problem, if you throw everything now, come midterm budget, what do you have basically to talk through there? I think there lies in the problem. Just to go back to a point I think that Elroy talked about, that to me highlights the point of saying the problem is with the service providers that government is put into place. cash paymaster and the whole suite that he talked about, right? Throwing more money in there is not solving the problem. It's holding the service providers accountable and make sure that they execute within the spirit of what needs to be done. So therefore, I think even the people within government themselves need to start shifting as to how they execute their jobs every single day. Hold people accountable of what you expect. We can't sit back and say, private sector, like anywhere in the world, will always exploit where things actually are not being looked after, basically. Once you start waking up to that point, will you start to see some accountability coming through? Just another point I just want to highlight on is that, in my view, government suffers from a coordination failure, right? Where it's as if the ministers or the ministries just don't talk to each other, where one just implements at the detriment of another, as an example. So if the Department of Labor institutes labor laws that are contra, to growth story, those people end up with the social development minister, who then has to provide for them some more. A case in point basically is within the Department of Home Affairs and Tourism, where the Department of Home Affairs goes and institutes basically without, to me, it's as if there's no conversation happening to say, guys, here's what we are doing, let's debate, so that when it happens, the team, the core EXCO team, the core EXCO ministers, no one is surprised and everyone aligns, because what happens in one space implements other places directly or indirectly.
Well, that's a very good point Sisa is making. I seem to remember we have clusters in Parliament. We have a security cluster, we have an economic cluster, we have all these clusters, they should be talking to each other. If you'd like to join us in today's discussion, please call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Right to Recourse. Stay with us.
In Africa, technology has created many new ways of doing things.
ICT is an increasingly important part of everybody's life.
It's being used in education, for social media, and now for farming too.
The best thing about internet for a farmer is that we get to share information.
On Network, we give you all the important African technology and social media news. That's Network with Ms. Phumelele Zondi every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time, only on SABC News.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse as we discuss the impact of the budget announced by Minister Pravin Gordhan on Wednesday on the poor. Gentlemen, there is something else I wanted to talk about, and that has to do, earlier somebody made reference to the tax base that is very small. But one of the problems that has always faced the government has been an Achilles tendon to the government, to the state, despite its comprehensive economic policies that look good on paper but difficult to implement, is job creation. How do we do that? We haven't seen anything that is working that is job creation. There was a start, there was something done called Public Works Program, and I don't think that was real job creation. Who wants to jump at that one? Mr. Elroy?
I think the preoccupation in our current economy on grants, and you asked earlier on about whether we're a nanny state, not at all. If we had half, or if we had 70% cut in unemployment, then clearly there would not be a need for grants. If we had higher matriculation rates, higher pass rates at university, I think the quality of the people we produce post-tertiary education in the job market, the uptake of jobs, of quality jobs in the economy may have given a completely different scenario. So it's very important to understand context. Absolutely. I think that the role of the state should be complementary to that of business. and we find ourselves in a binary. Remember, Dumile, we are the most unequal country in the world. For a middle income country, we have the highest unemployment rates. It would be naive to think that the state can complete all of that, can address all of those needs. It is absolutely necessary for businesses who are ethical in their practices to come to the table and work alongside civil society, create quality jobs rather than focus on exorbitant profits. You would remember what happened in Marikana. You would remember the wave of indebtedness of the families who were given access to credit and the bailout by the Reserve Bank of the African Bank. And for me, the government is treating people with kid gloves. Government is treating businesses with kid gloves, and that to us is unacceptable.
Sure. Let us come back to Dr. Forslund. The other question for me is the BEE program. The BEE program is actually meant to expand this tax base, and that seems not to be happening.
No, because it's not a broad-based BEE program. It's a program from creating a small additional black capitalist class. It's not directed to the black working class. And I think I would even go to say that the BEE policy is something that has been a bigger and bigger problem for the ruling party when it comes to corruption. I think if we would need any abbreviation, it would be broad-based working class consumption, double B, double C. That would be something to implement. I think that the wage levels in the economy is far too low. You can't have such I would say, a structural demand deficit in the country, and at the same time have local businesses, because people can't buy the goods that are produced. You have 9-10 million people who are in arrears with their credit cards. But the Pravin Gordhan spoke in his budget speech about people who are able to save. Well, there are millions of people who are not able to save. Households are getting more and more indebted. So you have the absurd situation where businesses telling workers that you can't have more in wages, and then you have the financial sectors who say, but you can borrow it from us at an interest rate.
Dr. There's something else. We're running out of time. There's something else I want to discuss with Cesar here, who must give us an insight in it. Cesar, there's a big talk from the Department of Trade and Industry about black industrialists, and I seem to remember in the apartheid days that the government got together with Anglo-American, and a slice of Anglo-American was put aside to create GENCO. I don't know whether if you know that story as well as I do.
Absolutely. I mean, just to touch on one previous point there, my view on job creation: no one creates jobs. Jobs become the consequence, rather. And I think we're too much focusing on
of growth,
and certain legislation and things you put in place, basically, an enabling environment. When business grows and it thrives, it attracts more people in, basically, as an example. So the issue around black industries, you know, there is no economy in the world that you find that when you've got major industrial companies that have occurred without the assistance of government. So to me, we need to take it one layer up, right? Before we even talk about black industries, let's look at our own economy first, which is basically saying we need to localize a lot, right?
Beneficiation.
Even before beneficiation.
Even before beneficiation.
Yes. How do we start, as an example, to start localizing, producing our own stuff as opposed to buying it from China and everywhere else in the world? Let's look at that level. Because when you buy things outside of the country, you're actually leaking money out and empowering other places, as an example. So how do we start to build our own capacity in? And it needs to be a deliberate effort, right? Because at company level, when a company looks at, should I be doing this thing locally or importing it, they'll make the decision. It's cheaper, more efficient to buy basically offshore. But at a macro level, when government looks at it and say, well, actually, we could be developing a whole new industry over here, let's promote localization, let's promote producing locally. Then the next step comes in. It's hell of important to make sure that the majority of the population of this country also participate in the economy of this country meaningfully as well. The issues around Black Industries program, it's a wonderful program. I think it can work. The issue again, which keeps on coming over and over and over again, is the implementation of it, is the execution of it. Will patronage start to seep in whereby the opportunities are not given or promoted to the right people, but rather going the wrong place, as an example. Even around BE as an example. To me, there's nothing wrong with BE. It's how it is executed. And you've got to look at certain issues around it. So there was a time in this country when you look at the same faces are becoming richer and richer all the time. Ask yourself the question, who actually appoints those people on the board, who actually appoints them to become BE shareholders?
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. I know we're not going to solve the problems of this country in this program. To close, our closing quote today comes from Minister Nene's budget speech last year, when he said there are many possible plans and priorities. The challenge of governance is to choose wisely between competing alternatives. The budget plays a role in clarifying these options, probing their costs and assessing implementation modalities. It seeks to allocate resources systematically and fairly. This has been Rights and Recourse. This program is repeated at 5 on Monday morning. From all of us here in the studio, thank you to our guests and goodbye.